General Sadat is one of the principal Afghan leaders dedicated to charting a new course for Afghanistan. Please welcome to the stage General Khoshal Sadat.
Trust me, this will be short. Thank you, Tom. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for being here and the service members for their sacrifice, devotion, and partnership with us in the past 2 decades of war against global terrorism. Thank you, veterans and citizens, for standing with us in those dark days. We will remember you and cherish your friendship for the rest of our lives. I would like to start to share a personal story of how and why our partnership made the world a safer place. During a joint US-Afghan special operation, General Sadat, who is here, recruited a leader of a terrorist network group from Pakistan. We'll call the leader Mati. At that time, I was part of that task force as well. We were focused on finding and finishing al-Qaeda operatives. Our American partners warned us of dangers of meeting that individual. After calculating risks and rewards, we decided to meet Mati. This wasn't a simple walk in the park. Previously, an individual in much smaller caliber lured CIA officers in Camp Chapman and Khost province, only to blow himself up and killing 7 CIA, 1 Jordanian, and 1 Afghan officer. That was a time when high-profile attacks increased in Kabul and the provincial capitals, which questioned the credibility of the Afghan government and American and coalition forces. Sami and I desperately were trying to minimize these attacks. After tremendous tactical procedures, we managed to bring Mati into a safe house. We spent 72 hours debriefing Mati, while our US partners were expecting an explosion any minute. I was surprised to meet this 5-foot, middle-aged, calm, clean, and collected, respectful individual. But oh my God, this was pure fucking evil. Excuse my language. Every story he shared was so shocking that several times during the meeting, I wanted to strangle him with my bare hands. But I also knew that if he had died, we would have never exploited the terrorist network. Because of his information, we were able to identify several Haqqani group members that were planning attacks against Afghan and American forces in provincial capitals. It didn't end there. Through his information, we found a prison that was holding Haider Gilani, the son of former Pakistani Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani. He was kidnapped in Pakistan and held in Barmal district of Paktika province, Afghanistan, resulting in a successful joint US-Afghan special operations night raid that rescued him. That was not all. Mati had another revelation that shocked me. He gave us information about a bomb that was placed in a cargo ship en route to US and supposed to attack New York. Through our partnership with the US government agencies, this plot was successfully foiled. This was one of the thousands of stories and tactical operations in partnership with the US that had made the world a safer place. Now let's talk about peace and war. Often our team is blamed for being warmongers. That's not true. Anything and everything we do is to make Afghanistan a peaceful place, to make it free and prosperous. But it is the Taliban that are a strategic obstacle for peace in our region. In 1995, an Afghan prominent leader, Abdullah Ali Mazari, decided to make peace with the Taliban. After negotiation, he was invited to go to Kandahar to meet the Taliban leader, only to be tortured, killed, and mutilated along the way. In 2010, President Hamid Karzai formed the High Peace Council and appointed former Afghan President Professor Burhanuddin Rabbani as the head of the council. Professor Rabbani then reached out to the Taliban to settle our differences through peaceful negotiations. The Taliban agreed and sent their envoy. During the meeting, the envoy detonated his turban-borne bomb, and killing Professor Rabbani. It ended our hopes for peace. Professor Rabbani was the head of the Afghan freedom fighters in the 1980s, successfully leading the Afghan war against the Soviet invasion. He also led the Afghan resistance against the Taliban in the 1990s. His appointment meant the utmost desire for peace. One would think we learned from our experiences. Lastly, our US partners began parallel path of negotiations with the Taliban, which ended with what's called the US-Taliban Doha Agreement. It had dire consequences. First, it forced the Afghan government to release 7,000 terrorists, including Al-Qaeda and drug cartels, in order to build trust for making peace. Contrary to the Taliban's promise, they went straight back to the battlefield. Secondly, the agreement forced the US military to hold all military operations and support to the Afghan forces. And lastly, it was agreed that the United States will pull out of Afghanistan without any consultation with Afghan and NATO partners. So what happened in the past 24 months? Besides moral injuries and loss of our country, 6 million Afghans left their homes. 22 million are sleeping hungry, including 6 million children facing malnutrition. 50% of our population inside Afghanistan, which are women, aren't allowed to work, study, or travel. Some of you might think Afghanistan is a poor country. That's not correct. We are one of the richest countries in the world. Where are the riches going? They are being exploited by China. I will give you a few examples. Taliban and China agreed on $10 billion contract on lithium, $4 billion copper, $1 billion on oil, etc., etc., totaling approximately $20 billion contracts to date. Where is the revenue going? Certainly not to my people. And what do you think China is doing with these minerals? They're using these rare earth metals and minerals to be used for building satellites, missiles, and other technologies to compete against the United States. There's another phenomenon that happened in the world. There are a number of coups in Africa. 3 of them are direct consequences of global terrorism that forced democratic governments to step down and their militaries to take over. These countries are Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. You might question, what is the correlation between Africa and Afghanistan's situation? With the presence of Taliban and return of Al-Qaeda to Afghanistan, the terror organizations throughout the world got the inspiration and direction to take over their own respective countries. The increased violence of the Al-Qaeda-affiliated groups have caused coups against democratically elected governments. That's not the end of the story. These militaries have invited Russian mercenary Wagner groups to partner with them against the extremism, thus challenging the influence of Western countries in Africa. Unfortunately, this trend will continue. Looking into the future, we must come to the realization that the story of our 2 nations, we must unite again, we must see beyond party politics in Washington, and only we can solve this problem. Proven record, we have done this in the past. It was not the lack of sacrifice and bravery of Afghan and American soldiers. It was the negligence and self-entitled interests of elites in Kabul and Washington that brought us this misery. As difficult it may be, we must see beyond the chaos. I call upon the new generation of Afghans and Americans to sit together again and craft a future that addresses these challenges and safeguards international security, thus safeguarding our respective national interests. General Mulholland, I think he left. I wanted to thank for his service. Also, we have General Yaftali, our former Chief of General Staff, who's here. Thank you for your service in toppling the Taliban in 2001. Sami and I promise it will happen again. Thank you very much.